Okay, we are now going to look at Esther 5, but want to kind of put in perspective where this falls in the book and what that means. As we open the book, we found a situation where King Xerxes ends up, as he's laying out plans for what ultimately will become an attack on Greece, going back and following up what his father had done unsuccessfully, that he has invited Vashti, the queen, to come in. She refuses, and you have in this banquet kind of situation. She was over taking care of the women's side of this, and this provokes conflict and a decision at a banquet by advisors, and we find, and very importantly, that this king is very easily influenced by those closest to him. It's one of the important things you learn about him. So it sets up an understanding of who the king is, and also, because Vashti is then essentially dethroned, then a situation develops that no one's serving as queen. Chapter 2, we're going to solve this problem. We get back from the wars, time has passed, and going to solve this problem because he's got to feel better because they didn't do so well in that war. So here we're going to feel better about ourselves, come back, and we got to fill this vacancy. So we have the beauty pageant. Esther wins, doesn't say, based upon Mordecai's advice, who her people are. And so she is selected to be queen. That is all these kind of things, and they're all the different things with the banqueting that's important for where we're going to be today, is that's going on. And at the end of that chapter, Mordecai exposes a plot against the king. So you've got some things laid out that are going to be really important for the rest of the story. So that's kind of chapters 1 and 2 are laying out all the important information about the main characters. We just don't have our antagonist yet. That brings us to chapter 3, and we are introduced to Haman. Haman apparently quickly rose through the ranks, whether during the war or the aftermath of that war, and he has been promoted. He is now essentially second in command, and he wants all the attention. He wants everyone to recognize him, and he convinces the king, again, those closest to him are able to influence that king very well, and that everyone should bow before him. But Mordecai doesn't. And because of this, he says it's because he's a Jew, and that would be wrong. And so Haman doesn't just seek his vengeance on Mordecai, but on all Jews. That is, if there's anybody out there that's not going to bow to him, then they're a problem. So we end up with the obvious solution, which is to say, kill everybody. That's the obvious solution, is genocide when you got your feelings hurt. So that's what they come up with, and how do they come up with this? When it's decided? Over a banquet. And you see that situation. So then chapter 4, where we looked at 2 weeks ago, and this, at the last part of chapter 3, is going to be published throughout the whole empire, and everyone's confused. What brought this on? So now Mordecai sees this and is going to draw attention to it in chapter 4. He then goes into mourning outside of the gate, because you couldn't dress like this in sackcloth and ashes and everything within, just outside the gate, makes this show, great mourning and everything, cannot be comforted. And so Esther, from her vantage point, can see that, and she's upset, sends out clothes through a go-between. You need to get back here and get all fixed up. I don't know what happened to your clothes. You need to settle down. And he sends back the message, you don't know what's going on. Here is the information that just went out. All our people are going to be killed at the end of the year. And you need to do something about it. And she's like, what are you talking about? I haven't seen the king in a month. And anybody just approaches him, he doesn't automatically just hold out his scepter and say, okay, you're dead. And that's when he says, you're going to die anyway. See note attached. You're going to die anyway. You're not going to get by, and this, so far no one knows you're Jew. It'll come out. And again, that point, who knows whether or not you've come to the kingdom for such a moment as this, that you've been put into this situation to do something about this situation. And so, through that compelling kind of exhortation, she accepts it. She gives instructions. That was a key element here. Gives instructions to Mordecai. We're seeing their roles shift. You go and you're going to fast. Remember, we had a feast, a feast, a feast, and in chapter 4 we have a fast. The opposite. Fast for 3 days. I'm going to do that for all the women that attend to me. You go and all the people around you. And the implication is we need to be thinking about how I'm going to be praying about this, how I'm going to put together a plan. What am I going to do? But I'm going to do it. And she says, if I perish, I perish. And the last thing says, essentially, they part. So you had this beautiful cliffhanger of what's going to happen. She's decided she's going to go to the king. So what's going to happen? Because that's a life or death situation. That's what brings us up then to chapter 5. And the way that's resolved is surprising. Okay? So here we are. We think Esther was crowned in the 7th year of the reign. That would have been around 479 or late 477. It could just shift a little bit. So we got the 12th year now of when this would be, and Haman was promoted somewhere in between and developed this relationship with the king. Okay, that's from chapter 3 of when he came on. But now let's look here at chapter 5, which I have entitled A Narcissist Exposed. Okay, so let's consider how this is put together. Again, going back and looking at this as really good storytelling, even though it's history, that the core elements are developed about what the situation is going to be in the first 2 verses we're going to see. And just like I told you, most of the time, rising action about what are we going to do about this then, that's what builds out in verses 3 through 11 for the majority of the chapter. And then you're going to see, here's where we really find, and this is going to be an odd, I'm going to tell you, to call this a story and an kind of a climax is a little bit harder because of what is going to be resolved in verses 12 and 13. It's not typically what you'd think would be resolved because it essentially is going to have another cliffhanger. So you're going to have a lack of resolution, except that points out what's happening in this chapter. So then shortly then closes with, okay, well, here's what's going to happen as a result of that, and here's how we should feel about it in the denouement. So that's how we're looking at this as I call it a tragic comedy, and that shows you, it just kind of depends on your point of view, okay, about how things turn out. Now we're going to look at, and then we're going to get to the text specifically, but here are the people that are involved in this. So you have Xerxes, who is going to be your ruler that's making the most important decisions about what's going on. Haman is, in this role, I would argue, a jester. Because it's a sad kind of situation in a way. A fool might be a better way to put it. This might be a fool. Because of how he looks with all of this going on, that he is clueless to what's actually happening, and he completely lacks self-awareness. I want you to note that as we go in this. And now we come to Esther's role, and don't be confused. I may have to come up with a better word for this, but this is the classic idea of a seducer. And that is, she has a plan, and she's laying a trap. Okay? So that's what role she has in this. And that's the classic seducer. Whereas Mordecai is once again refusing to bow down to Haman, so he's a rebel. And then you've got some of Haman's, his wife, and his friends giving him advice, which makes them a sage. So those are the roles we're going to see as we walk through here this. So now we now begin, and we're going to look at of Esther chapter 5. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. Now, the first thing that you might have happen if you're just reading through this, and you just kind of got to the end of chapter 4, if I perish, I perish, cliffhanger, and then all of that is resolved, right? In the first two, in the exposition of the next story, you're thinking, what just happened? That's kind of like, really? Okay, that is important actually, because that's not the big issue. The big issue is not just whether or not Esther would be able to approach the king, it's whether or not there's going to be success with anything that follows. So it's a cliffhanger idea, and of the suspense that we ought to feel and get across. But now we move on to the next part, and we need to resolve that because we need to keep the story moving forward. But I want you to note from this how she approached the problem before we go to the breakdown. I want you to notice what you find here with her. You've got the third day, so that's a reference to what you found at the end of chapter 4. So on that third day when they'd been fasting, thinking about what to do, okay, here we go. That is, remember that the whole idea that went with that we saw with Mordecai is essentially you dress yourself in the poorest thing you have, and you just kind of, you're in a sense of mourning and prayer and focus on a problem, a very bad thing, or a very serious issue. So now what we find on this third day, she put on her royal robe. So it's implied, you don't see that directly from chapter 4 to chapter 5, but it's implied, the difference in what she's wearing in order to address this. She's choosing the very best she has. It should remind you a little bit of chapter 2 when she was told and instructed about what to wear in order to please the king. That she is choosing things to make her appearance be as regal and remind him of who she is, okay, and to draw attention as much as she can. So she starts off with the way in which she dresses. Okay, she's going to dress her very best. Then she, notice, stood in the inner court of the king's palace. So you have, remember that the outside the court generally, okay, and this was kind of the typical way it was done with all these kind of rings of how far you could enter in on your own. The Jews did a similar thing with the temple grounds of how far you could come in. Okay? And that's why you found that Mordecai had to stay outside the king's gate. So you come inside the king's gate, that puts you into the king's court. Well, now we're in the inner court of the king's palace. So remember that they would have had the king's palace. There was also a court, there was a women's area that was separate. Okay, they found this in archaeology. And so she has gone across from where she stayed and goes inside into that inner court of the king's palace. Now, the situation that was very typical in ancient culture for a king was that periodically what they would do, their role, they would come in, that'd be kind of the first thing you did, is you went down to this downstairs area that was visible to the court. Well, that's where the throne was. You would sit on the throne, and that is where then people had an opportunity to come and make requests of the king. So he is sitting on a throne that has essentially an open door, an entrance into that room that looks out into the court area. So Esther has now come and positioned herself so that she comes inside, gets in the inner court where she is going to be visible to the king in this inner court before approaching. All right, so does everyone understand now? You have kind of can visualize it a little better? So he is on his royal throne in the royal house. It's not an accident of writing for you to see royal, royal, royal in this verse. It's emphasizing all those characteristics around the king. facing the entrance of that house. Okay, so he's looking out. So here's what he then says. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. Okay, so we've got resolution to the first question, right? How's he going to react? Hasn't seen her in a month. So she's dressed for the occasion. She's approaching. She's there where he can see her. She hasn't walked up yet. Sees her. Oh. And then he holds out the golden scepter. Everything's lavish here. The golden scepter in his hand. This is the right to rule. Here you go. So point it at Esther. Then Esther went near. So now she approaches and touched the top of the scepter. It's interesting because there is both a forwardness to her actions in placing herself within the king's vision, and yet she is doing so to be noticed, and yet not simply directly approaching in a confrontational way. This is really wise. Everything that she does shows how much thought she put into this, about what she was going to do. So you've got, after the 3 days, the plan is in place. And we're going to see that be carried out. She made herself regal, attractive, and visible. She's not taking chances here. She's doing everything she can to give her plan an opportunity to work. The first part does, because Xerxes welcomes her, and now she approaches. So everything now is about the request. So the immediate question has been resolved about whether or not he's going to listen to her in the sense of just at least hear her out. That's now been resolved. That's setting this up. So what does that tell us? He has shifted away from the question in writing this, the question of Esther's immediate safety, and already moved it over to how is this going to happen, and what's the king's response to her request? How's she going to get there? And that's the surprise element in this chapter. How is she possibly going to ask him and approach him about the problem she has? Remember, the problem was not just approach the king. The problem is, King, you signed an order that all Jews are going to be killed. And I'd really like to find a way to stop that. That's the problem, right? So that's why this whole idea of Esther coming forward and be accepted before the king is just kind of pushed to the first 2 verses of the exposition. Now, with that being said, however, this could indicate, and this chapter is really important in this book, because you're starting to see in this chapter a shift. This is kind of what this chapter does. Is all of a sudden everything that has been going horribly, chapters 3 and 4 is basically a situation of desperation created by Haman, and now what do we do? Chapter 4, it's desperation. In chapter 5 now, the tone has shifted, and it's more moderate, because the very first thing is, king accepts Esther to come forward. So everything that we're seeing now is kind of a little more even again. So let's notice how this works in the rising action, verses 3 through 11. And the king said to her, okay, so now what's the request? What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. Now, I don't think you should take him literally here. I mean, because if you could, if I'm Esther, I'm thinking, that sounds good to me. I'll take it. Which half do you want? It's not, you see this in Herod in the New Testament as well. It's a kind of strong way of saying, I'm not giving up being king. Okay, but, so that's just kind of the language. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So we have a banquet again. That's a feast that she's preparing. This is, again, where decisions are made. And we also should notice from this that Xerxes likes his banquets, right? Can we all recognize that? This is a guy who likes his banquets, and that shows that Esther has thought about, how do you get on Xerxes' good side? I'm going to dress the part. I know what he likes. And then I'm going to do something that I know he likes. Now, there's some just practical wisdom in what you're seeing with how she accomplishes all this. Okay, so, all right, what does he do? Go get Haman. Let's go have that party. Okay, go get him. So we go through all this. So now they are together, and so he says, okay, that's good. I've always wondered, was anybody else there needing something done? Any other question? Because it seems, now it's not important, but notice, okay, what's here? Oh, Esther's here. From that point forward, let's go. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done. Now, notice that she's wanting, he knows that was not the real request. He already knows that. So, okay, she's just saying, hey, could we do this over a banquet? He likes to make decisions over a banquet. That's been established earlier in the book. Okay, so now we've got this. This is great. What's your request? Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. All right, so this should make you wonder, what is she getting out of now by putting it off another day? She's softening him up. Okay? It's because it's more time with the king. Okay? It's more time. It's a reminder throughout this. It's, oh, hey, she really does all this, and she's taking care of me. And so she's not going to take it down to just one. So she already has the plan. We're going to do this again. She's also softening Haman up, as we're going to see. What do you accomplish by all this? What's Haman's mindset going to be coming to the second banquet? You might be scratching your head about the first. But if all you've been done is brought in to a banquet and been treated wonderfully and served by the queen, well, how are you going to feel about yourself? All right. This is good stuff, right? So remember the aim that she has in mind. So we're going to put this off another day. All right, so now think about what this is, though, for us. This is more suspension. This whole chapter is, we've resolved the small issue of whether or not the king will listen to Esther. And so he's accepted that by putting out the scepter, he'll listen to her. He's accepted the request of going and having the banquet. Listen to her. He's accepted the proposal to go the next day and listen to her. Did you notice that? Okay, so now things are starting to shift a little bit, but we don't have any resolution. But now we get to this, and so we've had this first one, anticipating the second, and we get Haman. And this is, again, this picture of Haman. We saw him in chapter 3, but this is where we really get to see something about him. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. Okay, so we find then that one of these was not just getting audience with the king, but it is getting Haman to relax. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, so Mordecai, notice he's back in the king's gate. Isn't that interesting? What did he have to do to be back in the king's gate? He had to clean up. Yeah. So he's already cleaned up so he can be back in the king's gate. That's kind of fascinating. And that he did not stand or tremble before him. So Mordecai hasn't changed. He's still refusing to bow down before Haman. And remember, that's the original issue in chapter 3. What happened as a result? He was filled with indignation against Mordecai. He didn't show me the proper respect. But the next part is what ought to really get you. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Now that's not a whole lot of restraint here. He didn't go over and do anything to Mordecai in the moment. That's the only sense of restraint he's shown. But notice what he does. He calls everyone over. Okay, you're going to call your wife over. You're going to call your friends over. What should we do as we're now talking? You know, I want you to imagine Haman is having you over, and you're his guest at his house, and this is what he does. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. He's brought them all over so he could tell them how great he is. Look at me. I'm a wealthy man. Look at all my children, which was another sense of showing that you had wealth and prominence. I've got an important position. Look how far the king has promoted me. And look at all the different people that have to serve me. Now stop for just a second and ask yourself, why is he doing this? I'm talking about internal Haman. These are connected, right? Is that he has done all this because he's having to talk himself into how important he is, because Mordecai doesn't treat him like he's that important. Haman is upset because Mordecai does not hold as high opinion of Haman as Haman holds of Haman. You got that? Yeah. I know right now y'all are thinking about people you know. No. Okay. We'll try to learn beyond that point. Okay. So in the rising action, what we've seen here is Esther asks Haman to a royal banquet. Okay. That's an honor itself. Verses 3-5. That's a feast where we make decisions. She requests another banquet, okay? The suspense builds, and Haman notices Mordecai. Day ruined, he posts on Facebook. All right? So it's like, you know, he just came from the king and the queen, had a feast, treated as no one else in the kingdom, but Mordecai not bowing before him ruins his day. I just want you to get a good picture of who Haman is. That's being intentionally painted. Okay? So Haman then has his own dinner party. What does this tell us about when you have a feast? You want to make a decision, right? You're wanting some kind of resolution. And so that's what you see here in verse 10, and that's where he's going to brag a little bit about. Notice, he reminds us how good his life is. He seems to not appreciate this. He's telling everyone else how great he has it, but he's acting like his life is awful. Now, that disconnect is important in understanding a fool. Is that there's no self-awareness whatsoever, and they can't be satisfied. All right, so that brings us then to what I'm going to call the climax of this story. though because of the nature of this story, that could be, I guess, argued a bit. Verses 12 and 13. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Here we go. Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. In a sense, what we have here, from the point of view of Haman, do you notice how much of this is Haman's story again? Right? Okay. Notice it's Mordecai the Jew, because these things are tied together. What this has done is again pointing out suspense, but it's also what it's emphasizing then what hasn't been resolved. That's what's actually being brought up by Haman as he's going through all of this and that he has. What he lands on is, you know what we still haven't resolved here? That Mordecai Jew problem. That's still up for grabs. It hasn't been solved yet. Even though the decree has gone out, that nothing has changed about that, but it still bothers him that much that he can't even handle someone else not liking him for some time. So what does that mean? It means the royal banquet was not enough for him. It means the prospect of another royal banquet was not enough for him. Why? Because nothing can make Haman happy as long as Mordecai exists. Now, what kind of existence is that? That is a sad, sad existence. Everything has to be what he wants. Everyone must cater to him, do things his way, or his life's not good. And that's why I called this about a narcissist. So what do we get after this? Well, we get some falling action, just a little bit. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggested the king that Mordecai can be hanged on it, then go merrily with the king to the banquet. Now, do you remember at the end of chapter 3 how the way in which the king and Haman celebrated, and about the word good that appeared there about the decision? Any other good, right? Well, here we have the idea of merrily, that, okay, here's what you can do. Notice, as far as Mordecai is concerned, he can't wait till the end of the year. His hatred is so strong that as far as what his wife and friends think, the only way to resolve this is to immediately kill Mordecai. That's the only answer. He has so much lack of self-restraint and patience, he can't wait for everyone to die at the end. It's got to be tomorrow. Now, think about what great friends he must have, that the one thing that's highlighted is in this their own little private banquet, and they're giving a recommendation, it's to murder someone. Yeah, good people, right? You're a sage. This is your answer to the problem. Why? Because you're just trying to make someone happy that's your friend. 50 cubits high. Some have disputed that 50 cubits is 75 feet, approximately. Okay. What is the point? Is it as big as... The whole idea of that is not how bad the death is. It is... to shame. It's also the shame. It's actually to be posted where everyone can see, and here's what anybody who doesn't bow down to Haman gets. Okay, that's the point of, we want to draw attention to that Mordecai who's been such a problem. and is visible, very well known for this, well, we're going to make sure he's seen too, David. Yes. Yes, that's right. It's going on for years, right? It's the prominence of it is the idea of it's teaching a lesson. It is, and in this case, part of it is about how I feel about it. It's catharsis by murder. Okay, so I'm going to kill him in the worst way possible, and I'm going to display his body in the worst way possible. And this is what it's going to take to make up for how he has mistreated me, but not acting like I'm a god. All right, so go merrily. That's the answer. You've got it. Just go to the king. Now, how much confidence, let's stop right here. How much confidence do you have to have in your relationship to the king that casually going in and recommending that we murder somebody is going to fly without any problem? All right? Now, but if you remember, from Haman's point of view, the last interactions that kind of he's had with the king have been that decree that he agreed to, and then a banquet where he was obviously elevated and treated as being right next to the king in a private kind of ceremony. So you see, why not? He's unaware of all these other things. He's unaware of Mordecai's connections to Esther. He's unaware of Esther's connection to the Jews. Not considered. So for him, this is a slam dunk. That's the way they thought of it. So what do we end up with? Well, you've got this comforting advice. Let's kill him. Yeah. So we're going to build a gallows, which at that, don't think of it as a gallows with a noose on it and everything. This is likely a large pole with a stake that we're going to, however we end up killing him. This is disputed depending upon the situation. We're just going to hang him on, usually by force of impalement. Okay? So just ask the king to do that and go to the banquet with joy. We don't want to, now think about this. We don't want to get anything to get in your way from enjoying the banquet. Isn't that great? You know what, that Mordecai, he ruined your banquet. You had this banquet. You got to see it from his point of view. He had this great banquet, but it's ruined because Mordecai was there. Well, he's going to get a second banquet, so what we really need to do is make sure that Mordecai can't be there to ruin his day again. He wants to be able to enjoy the banquet and all that he gets from the banquet. So I'm trying to present this so you understand all the irony that's going on within this. And it is also foreshadowing for what will be ironic, what we'll see. But the main idea you need to get from this is Haman seems to not find joy except in others' pain. His own elevation, but even then that's not enough if anybody that doesn't go along with that isn't in pain. Okay, so the last part here of this chapter, we see the denouement. How are we supposed to feel about this? And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Now, you're supposed to also, since this is Haman's kind of story in the end, which is surprising because it's you think in your beginning, this is more about Esther's request. But because of the way that was resolved early on, it is shifted to be about Haman's attitude. And so at this point, Haman's pleased. In his mind, everything now, all his problems, he has a plan for. So he's got a plan to follow, while Esther is in the middle of the plan she created to follow. So we're going to have the gallows made, so they're going to be up there. So it's a quick, think about this. He went ahead and went home, and that day they're putting up the gallows. That's done. So all they're doing is going and raising something and staking it down and securing it. So he's happy-ish. He's as much as he can be. So what do we get with this? You've got satisfaction in evil. anticipation of malice, that is his idea of hurting someone. And what you have throughout this is his tragic flaw. I said it was a tragic comedy. His tragic flaw is that his attitude toward Mordecai is over the top. Is that narcissism is just played out with Mordecai being essentially the foil. His failure to be satisfied with what he already has, and to the point of an obsession to take away all that Mordecai has, that's a big-time character flaw. Okay? And we are intended to see it that way. Is that this is kind of what can happen when you have the wrong kind of character. So let's put all this together, because we are about halfway through the book. And this is, remember now, we've been doing the chapters as stories essentially, but we also need to consider the overall story. So we're about halfway through that and through the rising action. Why? Because we know we've got a problem and we haven't resolved that yet. We've still got the problem. That decree is still out there. Nothing's been done about it. So we're still dealing with that. We do, though, know the nature of the monster, and that is it's a genocide. We know the character of the heroine because Esther has, number one, been obedient to Mordecai, chapter 2, diligently. She has been interested, and she has followed directions. She has shown courage, and what you've seen in this play out, she's shown wisdom. Okay? And we know what the flaw is of the antagonist. But we haven't reached the peak. The emotion and the conflict are not there, and we don't know how it's going to be resolved. That means we have to wait with suspense again to get to chapter 6. And once more, you are going to have to wait, because I'm not going to be here for 2 weeks. It's working out beautifully. And we will pick up then when I get back.